So this morning we're going to be tying one of the oldest patterns. We're going to tie a hare's ear, and we're going to do it the original way without any of the fancy things like a bead or possibly a resin coating. I'm going to start just by taking a few wraps of 0.02 or 0.20 lead wire right near the beginning here. That will give us the weight we're looking for, and I'm just going to be rocking this back and forth like I always do, and pulling up, and the friction will let that lead break right off. And then we've got our other end here, and I'm going to do the same thing here. Kind of hold that lead in place there with the bottom of my fingers while I'm pulling this across the shank of the hook to get that friction and get that off. And I'm going to go ahead and, what I always do, I push it clear up to the top. That'll help get that all compacted together. And from there, I'm going to slide it back to about where I want it to be. And we're going to want it to be right there. So this is one of those flies where I will be in danger of crowding the eye of the hook because I don't have a bead. So I'm going to take a few thread wraps back here or back behind the eye of the hook. And I'm actually going to completely jump over this lead to the back end. So there you go. You can see that. And what that does is that's going to hold that in place, because we're not going to use any cement or Zap-A-Gap or glue or super glue. We're going to let that thread just hold it in place, and by just jumping across it, putting some wraps here and then jumping to this other side over here, that's going to allow us to hold this in place. From there, I'll go ahead and take a few thread wraps to start working on covering this up a little bit. We're just using a sheer 14-aught black today for this one. This doesn't need to be fully covered up by any means, because we will be putting some dubbing over the top of it. And as usual, you'll see me kind of rotating the vise back and forth. I'm just checking on how things are sitting, whether I like it or not. I do have a piece of lead here that is poking out more than I typically would prefer. Well, we've got a size 14 nymph hook, barbless in the vise. So now I'm going to just take some thread wraps back here towards where the barb would be if I had a barb on this hook. This fly is really just tied out of two materials if you discount the lead wire, and that's fur from a hare's mask or a rabbit, as well as some gold ribbing material. Okay, so I've got that kind of where I want it to be. Our lines, our thread secure here to our hook. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to tie in a tail. And we're doing it the old-fashioned way, so we'll be using this the entire time we're tying this fly today. This is just a hare's mask. You can see there's this little pointy ear. And you hopefully can see that I've kind of picked that over a little bit over time. Guard hairs are less fluffy, more stiff, and they actually make flies look really buggy, which is good, and you'll see that as we continue on with the pattern. But right now all I'm doing is I'm cleaning out just with my fingers, I guess preening or cleaning out some of those guard hairs. So we've got our chunk of hare's ear fibers, and they are pretty much all just guard hair at this point. And I'm going to tie them in You don't want a really long tail here. Let's get that thread counterclockwise turned so it'll help me get that right up against my fingers as I try to tie this down. Take a couple of wraps here and see what we got. And I am just going to pull out just a hair, no pun intended, to make that just a little bit longer. But that one thing with this pattern is, at least traditionally tied, like we're going to do today, it's not going to have a long tail. It's actually kind of short, and it's very bushy. So I'm going to keep my fingers on this material as I wind back, just to make sure that I'm keeping that up at the top of my hook shank. I don't want my tail to kind of wrap around. So I'm just going to carefully just come back to the point where, you know, typically I would have a barb, but this is a barbless hook, so we won't have that there. Got a little bit of rabbit hair sticking up over here. That's fine. So we've got our little bushy tail in place here. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to tie in our ribbing material, and I'm just going to use some gold flat tinsel here. We'll tie that in on the far side of the hook. So we'll just catch it in. I think it's bad form to say hair that many times when you're tying a hare's ear. So, yep, we're going to secure this back to where we want the abdomen of this fly to start. So that's going to be, you know, right back again where the barb of the hook would be most commonly. I'm going to take this back, and the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my hare's mask. Same one that I used before. I'm just going to use my fingers, and I'm going to just kind of pick from different areas so I get some different colors of hair, because you'll notice that there's just all sorts of variety of colors throughout this entire hare's mask. So I'm going to pick this out, and that's going to be my dubbing. At least you can see now we're making dubbing on our own from the fly, from the hare's mask itself. So that's about all I need. You'll see as I tie this on to the thread, or dub it onto the thread, and I'm just going to finger dub it. You'll see what I mean when I talk about guard hairs, which is what the tail is made from. Because I do have guard hairs in here in this little mix that I've made. I'm just going to throw a little bit of wax on my hook here, or on my thread. And we do want this body to taper a little bit. So you can see we've got some hair here, there, our hair dubbing. Tighten that down just a little bit more. And take that back to where I want this fly to start. And as always, I want to make sure I get one good clean wrap there, especially at the very tail end of this fly. And then from there, we're just going to work our way forward. Just like so. We're actually going to take this a little bit further than what the body typically is going to be. And I've got a mess going on there, so let's clean that up a little bit. There we go. Tighten it up again. Hopefully we're building a nice taper here on this body. And pretty much out of my dubbing material here, which is fine because that's about where I want to stop. Anyway, I'm going to clean this up a little bit. But what you can see, hopefully here, these are guard hairs. These are the ones that are poking out like this. They are stiffer, but they really do a great job of making this fly look so much more buggy. And I'll probably, you know, just because I'm OCD a little bit, I'm going to kind of, you know, pick some of the stuff out. Not a lot, but some of it. I'm going to take this silver or this gold flat tinsel, and I'm going to let it kind of sink into this rabbit fur, this hare's fur, pretty good. Evenly spaced kind of wraps as we move our way up the body or the abdomen here. And now that I've got that up about where I want it, I'm going to just take my thread. It's going to go over the top of that. As you can see, my red material is here, my thread's here, so these wraps are going over the top of this tinsel to lock it into place. After I get a few wraps behind it, I'm going to pull that same material back towards the back end of the fly, and I'm going to tie it down pretty tight here. All of this is going to be covered up, so I'm okay that it looks a little bit messy there. From here, I'm just going to go ahead and cut that tinsel off. We're done with it. I'll stick it somewhere where I'll lose it for sure. Actually, I'll put it somewhere where I think I can find it. But of course, I won't be able to find it. I was inaccurate when I started this fly, which is not unusual. There is another material that I'm going to use on this fly, and it's going to be this. It's a turkey quill. I'm going to use that to make my wing case. It's going to fold over the top of the thorax. This is one that I've used many times before. It'll be really hard to see, but I've actually cemented several of these for different fly patterns that I've tied where I want those to stick together. I'm actually going to be drawing from this side of the quill that doesn't have any cement, just so that we're doing it more naturally. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my bodkin here and I'm going to stick it through, looking closely at about how wide I want that wing case to be. We'll say it's going to be about that wide. So you can see how my bodkin is all the way through that quill, just kind of pulling it out, separating it out. And from there, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hold the tips here with my fingers. I'll take my scissors. Now that I've got that all separated, I know which one I want. And I'm going to go ahead and make a clip just like that. And there we go. Now we've got our turkey quill ready to be tied on. With turkey quill, the ends furthest from the shaft here are much thinner and they're much thicker the closer you get to the shaft. Another thing that you'll notice with a turkey quill is the side that's facing the lens right now is it's more dull. If I flip it over, it's actually more shiny, and we want the shiny to be showing. So a couple of things that I'm going to be doing here. First, I don't want to use the incredibly thick stuff at the end, but I also don't want it incredibly thin either. So I'm going to just come up that quill a little ways and make a cut. So that leaves me with my the end that I'm going to tie in here. This is again one of those weird areas where you have to think ahead a little bit. Because I want the shiny side to be up, I am actually going to tie this in with the shiny stuff pointing down, because it's going to fold back over the top of my thorax, exposing the shiny side. So on this side, we're going to go ahead and catch that quill after we spin our thread, so it'll actually not fight us, but work with us. I'll just take a loose wrap there just to kind of get him situated. I'll look more towards myself and just make sure I get that more centered than it was. And again, that's one of the nice things about the rotating vise, is I can just kind of look at it from the top down here and make sure I've got my material where I want it. And there I've got it. I've mucked around with it a little bit, but that's fine. One thing you'll notice with the hare's ear here as we're working on it is it's going to have a fairly large thorax. Just less than 50% probably. And I'm also not going to take many thread wraps up by the eye of the hook, because I don't want to crowd that eye. So this material is tied in, it's not going anywhere, so there's no purpose of me putting a ton of wraps up here by the eye of the hook at all. All that's going to do is make it harder for me to tie this off and not crowd the eye. So now that I've got that, you can see hopefully that turkey quill in place. We're going to go back to our hare's mask again. And I'm going to pick some more fur out of this, just sort of randomly, but actually I want a lot more guard hairs in the thorax area, so I want it to be even more buggy. And all I'm doing is taking my finger and pinching this hair and plucking it off. There's actually a tool, a rake tool for that, but I'm looking at seriously at this point. So just, picking out a bit. So you can see now we've got, we've got a bit of that hare's mask here. Trying to figure out how to show it to you. Kind of like that. I'm going to mix that together a little bit with my fingers. I'm just going to kind of pull it apart and stick it, double it back down, and pull it apart and double it back down. And then I'm going to actually take it, and what I end up doing is kind of spreading it out like that. It's a little bit inverted, which is what I want, meaning that it's narrower down here and thicker up here. And that's going to work out nicely as we're doing the thorax here. So I'm just going to, just like before, I'm going to finger dub this stuff on. I'm not going to dub this one on nearly as tight because I want this to be really buggy. So look at how buggy that is. That's awesome. Go ahead and scoot that on down, and I'm going to come backwards to make sure I am covering, and I will tighten that up a little bit, not a lot, but a little bit. But I want to make sure that I get this over that turkey quill, and from there we're just going to work our way back forwards towards the eye of the hook. You can see at this point how bushy that actually is. In fact, it's so bushy, I think I'm going to try to string it out a little bit more. So I just actually undid it, brought it back a little bit forward, and we're starting to see that nice buggy thorax. I'm going to throw just a tiny little bit more in on this one, not a lot, just a tiny little bit more. And just go back and pick some more stuff out of my hare's mask. And dub that on my thread here. Push it up. Just trying to make sure I have a nice beefy thorax here on this fly, because that's what I want. And I'm just going to take my fingers and pull that back a little bit. And that'll just kind of help me keep that eye pretty clean. So here we are at this point with the fly. So our next step is we're going to pull our wing case over, and the shiny side will now be up because I tied it facing down. And I'm just going to put a loose thread wrap over the top of this wing case here, Because what you don't want this all to clump together. You want this to be a decent spread. So I've got it about where I want it, so I'm going to go ahead and take a couple more thread wraps back here behind it to lock it into place. I'm going to pull all of those fibers back now, and I'm going to throw in some wraps right at the eye of the hook. And once I have that done, I'm just going to come in with my scissors, and I'm going to try to cut that turkey quill off as close as I possibly can. Just like so. And then we'll build ourselves a little bit of a head here with the black thread. So I'm just going to, take a few turns here. It doesn't need to be enormous or anything like that. And remembering, I'm going to be throwing a whip finish in here as well. So that's going to be good enough for me right there. I'm giving myself a little bit of extra thread, so I can grab my whip finisher. I've got my whip finisher here and ready to go. And we'll just do, a 4 or 5 turn whip finish here to finish this fly off. Just like so. Put my whip finisher back. And then I can come in with my scissors and I can clip off that extra, or clip off my thread, just like so. So hopefully at this point you're seeing a couple of things. Number one, just how buggy this thing is, and that's what we want. We want a really buggy looking fly, and that's what the hare's ear is. You can see over the top here the turkey quill that's being the wing case. I'm probably going to come in with my tweezers a little bit and pluck some of these longer hairs out. Okay, so we're pretty much finished here with the hare's ear. We've got the bushy tail. Can see that rib. Hopefully the golden rib kind of sticking through, and our wing case made out of that turkey quill. One of the last things that I'll do sometimes with these is I'll take a little brush that you can buy just specifically for this purpose, and I may pull out just lightly some of these hairs by the thorax, just by brushing along. I just want to pull some of those out. Probably not quite that many, but so that's going to give that that front end an even buggier look. You can see I pulled some of those guard hairs out, which gives it just a little bit more of that buggy appearance that we're looking for. So that's the traditional way of tying the hare's ear pattern. Probably we'll have some where, sometimes I'll tie it with a bead, a gold bead on the head. Sometimes I'll put UV coating over the turkey quill here, just to make it shinier, a little bit shinier and more of a hard case. But as far as just traditional, this is traditional. I used thread, I used some lead to weight it down. All of the tail and the dubbing is straight plucked right off of a hare's mask or a rabbit mask. And then I've got just a piece of turkey quill, again, completely natural. So, so there you have it.